podcast. Today, I'm joined by Russ Armstrong. Russ is was the co-founder of Limelight Platforms, which was a venture-backed tech startup, and he's now the VP of Sales and Strategy at Boast.ai. Russ, thank you for doing this. This is really awesome.
Yeah, thanks, Will. Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
Excited to share some today. So
for sure. Yeah. I mean, you're going through such an amazing time with your current venture. When we were talking last week, you talked about being in this insane scale up phase. So I want to talk to you about hiring new people when you're in that growth phase, what it took to get to that point. And I want to talk to you about your entrepreneurship journey in general. And then, as well, how you deal with the stresses and the difficulty explaining what it is that you do to other people, because that's what I'm sort of centered on here. So I'd love to jump in first with the question, as I always ask, how do you describe what do you do?
yeah, good question. Well, how do I describe what I do? It depends how long my elevator pitch is going to be.
Mm,
That's always, if I need to go into a little more detail, I have a larger story, but
right.
really depends on that side of it. A little bit of background. So I spent a decade as an institutional equity trader on a trading floor, and most people never get to experience a trading floor, but it's actually this really weird environment. I was at RBC. Our trading floor was like the size of a football field. There was like 500 people on it. Everybody had like 5, 6 monitors, flashing lights, people standing up, yelling across the room at each other. It was just this really weird environment.
Would you say it is like they show in the movies, like Wall Street?
It
Is it
is.
basically just the same thing?
It is. It's like
Yeah.
that. It's like
Right.
that. And just like it looks like chaos, but it's organized chaos.
Right.
Everybody knows what they're doing. Everybody has a role. Everybody's got a product. Everybody's doing something, but it's just organized chaos. If you were to go see it in action, it's kind of weird. And it was weird. Like that was my role. Like 10 years of doing that, I left, and a buddy of mine convinced me to go to a tech startup, and ended up leaving behind my network, my knowledge. It was actually scary to like
Mm,
abandon something like that and like go restart, right? Like all of my contacts were in that space. And ultimately I decided to do this. And it was really just about the due diligence behind it. It was, the domain expertise that my co-founder had and the disruption, the scale of the disruption. So I did some work on that. We ended up raising about $13 million and scaled the first part of Limelight. We got to about 50 employees, and revenue didn't really keep up with where we needed it to get to. So I ended up leaving and joining Boast. And it was interesting joining Boast with that perspective, because now I'm on the next stage of that. And this is the scale up stage. So we closed a $30 million round back in December.
congrats. That's
Yeah,
really
thank
awesome.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you. And now we're at this scale up stage where we're going, I think we just hired our 70th employee. We'll
Mm,
probably be at 100 employees by the end of Q2. And it's a very different mentality thinking about how to scale your organization quickly. So
right.
that's kind of like me in a nutshell. And I got stories along the way, but that's kind of like where I am today for
Well,
sure.
that's great. Yeah, I kind of want to take it in order. One thing I loved about what you did is put your story in the context of an actual story, and that's something I
Right.
always urge entrepreneurs to do, because if you just say, well, this is my company and this is what it literally does, that's not necessarily interesting unless it's like the best idea ever, or unless
Right.
the person listening happens to need exactly that thing. Then
Right.
great, I'll listen to exactly what it does. But if you're trying to get somebody to start paying attention to you and listen and go, where do I fit in here? The story is really the greatest way to do that. And I know that you teach this to a lot of young founders as well. Why do you think, first of all, why do you position yourself in that story? Why do you start with where you came from, if it, with the institutional equity trading? What does that give you in your pitch?
You know what? I think with any story, you're trying to create interest. You're trying to create people that they can latch onto it.
Hmm.
And you probably teach some of this. You're trying to paint visuals for people so they can picture themselves in the story that you're telling, being
Right.
like, oh, I can visualize that with how you're telling your story. And it makes it more real for them.
Yeah.
And I mean, that carries on to your pitch when your investor deck. Like, how are you getting people involved, and your sales process, how important that is in your sales process. If you're selling a prospect, how do you paint a picture for them to be like, that is me, and that is a pain that I experience.
Yeah.
Oh, I can actually see this by how you're describing it. And that lets them buy into the story a lot more and get excited about a solution potentially.
Yeah, and I loved the way that you told that story. Just to kind of geek out a bit on literally
Yeah,
storytelling technique, you told the story about the trading floor, and first of all, saying that a trading floor is not something that everybody gets to experience. So that makes my ears perk up and go, oh wow, so yeah, let me get some inside information and some insight into what that
right.
looks like. I have
Yeah,
stereotypes in my head from the movies, but I want to hear. And then to know that it is kind of like the movies, and to talk about this organized chaos the size of a football field, that detail that you gave that starts to help me visualize it. It was all
yeah,
so well done, and I really did feel like I could see where it was. And even though it's not necessarily completely related to maybe what you're doing now, there is relevance, because why you ended up where you are now has something to do with your past. Surely your experiences and
yeah.
education and everything makes you go choose one path over another. So by giving somebody insight into who you are and your story, they kind of start to go, okay, I get it what he's doing here, and I know why he's part of this company, and it makes them like you more as well.
Right. Yeah. And you know what? And a lot of storytelling too is, especially from an entrepreneur standpoint, how do you find something that you can relate to somebody on some level that you can open up a conversation about?
Right.
And by giving a wider variety of a story, someone might be able to be like, oh, well, I trade stocks.
Hmm.
Cool. If you trade stocks, I can have a conversation with you for hours.
Right. Yeah.
Have you been on a trading floor? I can have a conversation with hours. If you've done a tech startup, I can have a conversation for hours. So like it gives people the ability to latch on to something where they can relate,
Right.
and then you have their attention more. And that's part of that storytelling also. How do you bring them into the conversation so they're engaged? Because that engagement is where they really buy in.
Yeah. It's so true. And so I mean, just I think that's so masterfully done. It's such a nice thing to have to paint for my audience, for like, this is what I'm, telling people to do. And for all founders, and I know you mentor a lot of young founders. So before we get into your actual story, I want to stay on this high level thing about storytelling in general.
Mhm.
Um when you're mentoring a young founder, I find a lot of the reluctance to put themselves at the front of their story is they go, well, nobody cares. It's all about my idea. It's all about the product. Or, I don't want to talk about my past, or I don't want to talk about myself too much. Or I'm not confident putting myself in the story. How do you answer that? I don't know if you get that objection a lot too, but how do you answer them? Why do you think it's important for a founder to kind of put their name and face and story in front of their business?
Yeah, I mean, the way I look at it and the way I tell it when people are creating their pitch decks, I always talk about it. Every slide needs to be $1 billion idea.
Hmm.
You can't just have the one slide with your TAM and be like, look at my total addressable market. Your every single slide needs to tell a story of why you're going to be a unicorn.
Hmm.
And that even relates to you. When you walk into the room, why are you going to be the next person who's building a unicorn? And if you don't have that story, the investor's like, I like all of this, but I'm missing something on the founder, right? Like, where's the
Right.
story of this founder? Why is this founder going to be the one who succeeds? Because half the time, these investors, they're betting on the founder more so than they're betting on the idea.
Right.
Because let's face it, at an early stage, I don't like the word pivot because pivot to me is too drastic of a move, but there's always course corrections along the way.
Yeah. Different
And you need,
iterations of the same idea.
yeah, exactly. That's like pivot to me is like more of a directional change, which I don't think necessarily is what we're looking at. But the investor wants to know that this is the person that's going to figure it out. And figuring it out is being sold through like, hey, here's a story of how I've figured it out in my life.
Hmm.
This is how I've figured it out. I figure everything out. And that's the
Right.
story you want to tell them because then the investor's like, I like, I like problem solution, total addressable market. There's something off on this slide, but this founder is going to figure it out.
Right. That's a really, really interesting thing to keep in mind, is that you're not even selling them on the idea that you are necessarily um, the most experienced or the most knowledgeable in a given market. But if you show them that you can figure it out, then it doesn't matter where you are, you'll get to where you need to be eventually if you have that skill set of how to think and how to problem solve. So
Yeah.
how do you, if you're kind of working with a founder, what do you how would you coach them into showing an investor that they are like that? What do you tell them to do or to say to to show them that I'm somebody who can figure it out?
Yeah, well, I mean, from my perspective, it's that confidence, it's that delivery, it's the practice,
Hmm.
it's the knowing what to expect from the presentation. Um, I know they're going to ask, like, here's the best one. When you are good enough and you've done your pitch so many times that you leave yourself vulnerable to a question, you know you can hit out of the park, and you can actually tee it up that way. And you're like, I know they're going to ask this question. And then they ask
Right.
that question and you're like, and here's my answer. And
Nailed
you
it.
rhyme it off
Yeah.
to them and you boom, and you've hit it out of the park. And you're just like, I knew they were going to ask that
Right.
because I purposely set it up that way. But
Right.
that's the level of work and dedication that needs to go into these pitches to guide that conversation in the right direction. And I think that's it. Like you really need to spend a lot of time and a lot of practice on your delivery and how you approach it to get it to that part, to like that be that smooth.
And that's great advice. And one final question on that: do you think that you should spend a lot of time honing your pitch before you start getting it in front of investors, or would you say get it in front of investors as soon as possible, get the feedback, and don't be afraid to make it perfect before you start pitching the idea?
Yeah. I mean, I mean, if I were really to categorize it, I would break down my investors into different stages.
Mm,
Um, I might try and like, you know, if you're in Martech and you have a list of 100 Martech investors, I'm not going to go there first. I might try to like some generalist investors who my probability of closing is a lot lower,
yeah.
and I would pitch them first because then I get feedback from them. And then I got my tier ones over here that once I got it to a certain level, I'm going to start dipping my feet in the water on the tier one investors who the probability of closing is a little bit higher. And then start going to them. You do need that feedback early stages, but you don't want to, fire blanks, right? You don't
Yeah,
want to
and
go
just
in there and
waste.
exactly. You're wasting the opportunity at that point.
Right.
So there's a little bit of both, and you got to kind of think about it like, what is my strategic process of practicing and
Mm.
getting in front of people?
Yeah, I often say that when I'm helping people with virtual video conferencing pitches or presentations or whatever, I'll say use a really low stakes Zoom meeting.
Yep.
That's just kind of maybe a team meeting or something with a potential prospect or client, but nothing too high stakes. And use that as like your rehearsal hall, your playground to work on these speaking skills that I teach, like the speech settings, your volume, your pitch, your pace, your inflection, and do it
Yep.
in that low stakes scenario and then try things out and see what resonates. You don't want to be doing all that fiddling and tinkering when you're actually in a moment where you want to be, where you would like an outcome out of that. You want to be pretty much just focusing on telling your story then. But
Yeah.
using those lower stakes, low probability opportunities to really work on your actual pitch itself, I think is fantastic advice. And,
Yeah.
and just figuring out which investors are ones that you can just use as some at bats just to practice getting on your feet, getting the nerves out, getting all the stresses and learning those questions that they're likely to ask. And then once you've done that, you can kind of move up in class and move up in also in terms of the niche that you're in, it sounds like you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. And even
Mm.
starting like, and you probably would recommend like just record yourself doing it
Yeah,
without an audience at
totally.
first. Like start there. And everybody hates watching themselves
Yeah,
recorded and talking. Like everybody hates that.
it's the
But like,
worst.
but you have to get over that. That's like,
Yeah.
and the best way to get over it is just force yourself to do it. I
Yeah,
mean,
do it 40 or 50 times and then it'll slowly be 1% less painful and then do it that's what
yeah,
I always say. Like I've been watching myself for like 4 years now since I started my current company and have been putting out social media content, and I was terrified to do it at first. I hated it. I still have a hard time
yeah,
watching myself, but I can do it with a bit more distance
right.
and a bit more. I can kind of look at myself and go, okay, that wasn't the worst. Oh, I should, I could kind of clean that up. I can start to not be so self-critical and just be like, oh, I look stupid. Everything I say is stupid. My voice is stupid. My hair is stupid. And I can kind of use it for actual feedback now, but it does take many, many repetitions to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the other critical things that helped me get over it, and I'll be, like everybody, like you said, I used to hate public speaking. I used to hate these type of engagements where people would view it after the fact. And I think, even from my early days at RBC Capital Markets, there would be brilliant people in the room and we'd be discussing like a trade idea or earnings on a company, and people would put their, stand up and say their comments. And you're just like, wow, like I don't want to be in this room and say the wrong thing. And it always
Mm,
kind of brought you back. And then you got to a point where the if you were a subject matter expert on a certain field, you knew that your voice mattered more and you could have and express this opinion to people because you were a subject matter expert on it. And that even allowed me to be more confident in my public speaking because I had self-belief that I knew what I was talking about.
Mm,
And I actually knew what I was talking about more than the other person.
right.
And that's the exact same thing investors have. You are a subject matter expert on your product, your domain, your addressable market. The investor isn't, you are.
Mm.
And if you have that self-confidence and that belief that you're actually the subject matter expert on that, your delivery changes considerably because now you're presenting with authority. This is how it is. This is the market. This is the opportunity. I know this because I'm the subject matter expert on this. You're an investor and you're a generalist,
You're
more or
teaching.
less.
You're a
Yeah,
teacher.
you're teaching them, and
Yeah.
you're like, this is how it is. And if the founders can get into that mindset of they know more than who they're presenting to, your teaching and your delivery gets better and your story gets better.
Yeah, and if you think about like the best teachers you've had versus the ones where you fell asleep or, dozed off in class, there's some pretty clear through lines for all those different people. They probably
Yeah,
had some kind of energy and volume and pace in their voice. And they probably moved around more than the other teachers. Like I used to be a teacher. I come from an education background as well. And
yeah.
there were some teachers who were very smart and very good at what they did, but they sat in a chair and pointed to the chalkboard and went, yeah, so there's the grammar rule. And I was like, dude, get up.
Yeah.
Like, stand up, man. I mean, I know I'm tired too, but you're just sitting in a chair and you're making your students do all the work to get interested. And people love learning from a good teacher. So if you can
Yes.
remember those great teachers you have, imitate their voice and their body and their hands and their face, and try to dig up the passion of, hey, there's this really cool new opportunity here. I want to teach you about it in case you want to get on board. I'm going to do it anyways, but if you want to get on board, that's great. And here's the opportunity and here's the details. Then
Yeah.
that's exciting, and it generates that sort of engagement rather than, oh shit, I have to speak in public here. I'm going to rattle it off so I can sit down. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's just a way
Yeah.
different energy.
Yeah. And once you become a subject matter expert, it's like, challenge me.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
dare you to ask me a
That's
question
the
because
best.
that's where you want to get to with your company. You want to be like, ask me a question because I know I have the answers for all of these things.
Hmm.
And if you don't have the answers, well, then you need to go do some homework and find the answers
Yeah.
because that's part of being a subject matter expert. And that's part of closing a financing round
Mm.
is you've satisfied the due diligence required for an investor to give you 1 million, 3 million, $10 million. And you need to have those answers.
Okay, I'm just going to ask you one last question about technical pitching because I do want to get
Yeah.
into the story, but I get asked the question all the time. What do I do if an investor asks me a question and I don't know the answer? My answer normally is it's okay to not know something, but don't apologize too much for it. Just say, "Oh, I actually don't know the answer to that," but then set a plan. Say, "I'll look it up and I'll make sure I get that information to you." So making a plan to follow up and giving them that answer. But as somebody who's been in the room a lot more than me, what would you say to that?
Yeah. I really think it depends on the type of question and what is my expectation of me should have known the answer to this question, right? If it's a question about a nuanced data piece of like, what is your customer acquisition cost on your ad channel? And you're like, yeah, it's in, like I'll get it for you.
I
It's in
don't
my
have that figure.
Salesforce.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, like why are
On
like
hand.
really? Is this what you're asking me right now?
Hmm.
Versus if the question's like, um, something about your total market size or your addressable market or a bottom up or bottom, like it really depends. And like these are the type of questions, like there's certain questions you should know the answer to,
Hmm.
and there's certain questions that don't really matter, and it's like, why are you asking me that? That's just irrelevant. Like for an investor to be like, tell me the makeup of your tech stack and what are your vulnerabilities, it's like, what? Like I'm raising money to fix all those problems. Those aren't relevant. Are you buying
Yeah,
into my story? Because
right.
I'm telling you a story of how I'm going to become a unicorn, and you're asking me a question about a nuance of how my software is built currently.
Yeah,
Not relevant.
right.
And I think that's and I didn't really answer your question either, but that's another technique. Don't answer the question. Talk about things that you can talk about that are
Hmm.
adjacent to that answer, and typically that satisfies a lot of investors at the same time. It's what politicians do also, right? They don't
Yeah.
answer the question, but they talk about something else. There's elements of it. It really depends on what that question is.
Right.
But knowing it also, like if it's a question like, what is the data point of this? It's like, I'll get that for. I don't have it on hand, but I know I
Yeah.
have it.
Yeah.
Like
Right. Yeah.
that's what I'm trying to get at. It's like
No, that makes sense.
how 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 good of a question was it in the first place?
Mm.
It's kind of
Yeah.
where I kind of look at.
That's really good, and that takes a level of confidence I think that a lot of, especially entrepreneurs in my audience, won't have yet, because they haven't been to all those finance raising meetings, and
Right.
they're doing a lot of them, but they're still in the process of figuring that stuff out.
And the second thing I'll add to that, everything we do as founders and entrepreneurs, we are hypothesis testing.
Hmm.
So sometimes you'll get into an early stage and they're like, well, what's your CAC and your LTV? And you're like, well, I've only been around for a year, so I don't know my lifetime value. And it's
Yeah.
like, that's not a good answer. My LTV is 3 years. Cool. Let's go with that number.
Hmm.
You need to make assumptions about your
Right.
business at an early stage for you to have accurate information. There is nothing wrong with making assumptions. People make assumptions all the time. People in accounting make assumptions all the time. CPAs make assumptions all the time.
Right.
This is how the world works. We make assumptions. So based off of my set of data and knowledge that I have, I made these assumptions. And based off of those assumptions, here's what I know about the business. That is a better answer than I don't know, or I don't know exactly.
Yeah.
You need to have at least shown that you've thought about it.
I would imagine that very scientifically educated and minded founders suffer from that a lot. I work with a lot of scientists still, even though I mostly work with entrepreneurs. We started this company working with science students at U of T, and they're all so scared to say anything that the literature does not concretely prove.
Right.
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 So I'm trying to tell them to tell a story, and they're like, well, I can't say that because that's not true, or it's probably true, but we don't like know it, like,
Right.
from through
Yeah.
science. And that's good. Scientists need that kind of rigor to be clear about the kind of work that they're doing, but they also lose out a lot of storytelling ability because they can't find the perfect balance between sticking to the facts and the truth, which is obviously very important, but also making some assumptions and making some predictions and telling some kind of future abstract story with these numbers.
Which is funny from a scientist perspective because they do experiments all day long. And if you remember the scientific method, you create a hypothesis and then you test it and find out if your hypothesis is correct at the end of the day, which
Yes.
is exactly what you're doing. Like if you think about it from a startup standpoint, that is a giant experiment.
Yeah.
You have a hypothesis that you're solving a problem and that people actually care to spend money to solve that problem. And your experiment is you going and selling it to people and raising money to build software to do that. Like
Hmm.
the entire thing is a hypothesis and an experiment.
Totally. But if
Um,
you were to say that to the investors, say, listen, I don't know if this company is going to make any money. It's just a hypothesis. Then you might undercut your story
right.
a bit. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. You don't want to undercut your story and tell it that way, but you
Yeah.
do want to, as the founder, understand what assumptions you've made about your success.
Right.
And some, to your point, some are concrete data points that you have, and some are, say you only have a limited set of data and there's flaws in your data set. Well, would you rather use a data set that is limited or no data at all?
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
You're going to use some data
Hmm.
because that data is going to point you in the right direction, and you're never going to have a complete answer until it's too late. So you need to make those
Right.
assumptions.
And as long as you're not just pulling numbers like out of your ass and just saying, oh yeah, I think our market is $50 billion. And you say, well, where does that figure come from? You're like, well, I just, you know,
Right.
yeah,
Have an
yeah,
answer.
yeah, yeah,
Well, here's how I got it. Here's my
yeah.
top down analysis and here's my bottom up analysis.
Right.
Happy to share it with you. It's in Appendix 6.
Hmm.
End of conversation. You've
Yeah.
done your
Yeah.
homework.
Right. Well, this is amazing. This is amazing pitch coaching advice, and I think so many founders have to learn these lessons the hard way through getting grilled and roasted in these high
Yeah.
pressure, high stakes environments. So it's really nice to be able to give some clues like this. And so you learned a lot of this stuff, I would imagine, through Limelight, through raising with Limelight. You said you raised 13 million. What was it about that value proposition or that company that you think was able to raise so much?
Well, you know what? And I tell this in one of the I do a story on the fundraising cycle
Hmm.
at Limelight and how we raise the money and the different stages, friends and family, incubators, accelerators, seed rounds, seed round extensions, Series A, like kind of go through the works on how we raised it all. And I start that story off by saying every company is different in their fundraising journey. And it can be what's your growth rate? How exciting is the sector you're raising in right now? What's your current traction, your MRR, or other milestones that drive your valuation? Everybody's got this different story. And the story that most people hear is the company that's growing 300%, that's, at 400K in MRR, and it's a slam dunk. And they're like, I chose what investor I took money from.
Yeah.
And that's not that helpful of a story, really.
It's like
Like,
learning from the top success stories. I often
yeah,
find this way, like Forbes or Entrepreneur Magazine will write, here's how, who was the one recently? Was it Natalie Portman, or it was an actress, a very well-known, successful actress? No, Jessica Alba. It was
oh,
Jessica Alba.
Alva
She
with
just raised a
honest,
whole
yeah,
bunch. And I was kind of thinking, okay, I mean, I'm sure she worked really hard. I'm sure she is smart. I'm sure she did her homework, but she's a celebrity. She inherently has a massive
yeah,
following. That marketing piece is just solved simply because of who she is,
right,
right?
right,
So it's kind of weird to give people like,
yeah.
it's like saying if you want to get better at basketball, then just be LeBron James. It's like, well,
I think yeah,
yeah,
exactly,
yeah.
exactly.
I mean, I would if
Although I
I
will give
could.
him
Yeah.
credit, her products are pretty awesome. I will
Well,
say I
that's
use them
right. It's
myself.
like,
So,
and
but
LeBron James is also an incredibly hardworking guy, right?
yeah,
He like I watch things that he does. It's not to take anything away from them, but if or like
it,
Chris Hemsworth just released an app, right? And
yeah,
it's like that app's probably great, but it's you can't necessarily take those lessons from people
right,
who already have 5 million followers on social media, because that
yeah,
just solves one of the toughest challenges, is to get
right.
the word out there. And so that's problem's already solved.
Right. So that's kind of how I present it when I talk about fundraising. I'm like, like lessons learned from somebody who was a serial raiser, and that's what I kind of called. We were like we are always raising. We
Right.
raised multiple rounds. We were diluting ourselves.
Yeah.
We were building enterprise software, so we kind of had to. We needed a lot of capital to get it to a point where we could sell it to an enterprise, which is very capital intensive. Um, but we were constantly raising, and our metrics they were okay. They weren't great. They weren't like super high, so it's not like we could knock on anybody's door. We had to work really, really hard to fundraise. And I think that's the story of most people. It's
Hmm.
very, very difficult to fundraise. It's not as easy as you think. It's much harder than you think. It takes more time than you think. You need to be more prepared than you think. Pretty much everything you do in fundraising is harder than you think it is.
Hmm.
And I think that's the reality for most people. And, as they say at any company, if you're trying to do too many things, you'll do them all poorly. And if you focus on one thing, you'll probably do that very well. And I
Hmm.
think that is this big challenge for a founder, because you're trying to drive the company forward. You're trying to fundraise, but you're only spending 25% of your time fundraising. You're probably going to get a 25% grade on your fundraising effort if you're spending
Right.
25% of your time. Like,
Right.
it needs to become a full-time job for you to master that pitch, especially if your metrics aren't that great. If your metrics aren't that great and you're spending part-time on it, what do you think your results are going to be?
Hmm.
Um, and on the flip side of that, if your metrics are great, you're probably going to get away with fundraising a little bit quicker. Hey, here are my ridiculous rates. One of the fastest growing companies, you send it to 10 people and somebody's going to respond. But that's not the case for most people, because it's much harder than that.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And so would you say that in that case it's worth like having a co-founder who is just let's say in a CEO role, or at least, the business sales and marketing side of things, whose job it is really 100% of the time to go out and pitch, and then let the other kind of founders take over the product design side of things?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why that natural fit of like a technical co-founder and a business co-founder works well, because you have two people running the business.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of strategies that I think second time founders would talk about in terms of what they would do differently. And some of those lessons I have are really around, this is one of the biggest metrics I like to quote. In the US, entrepreneurs typically spend 2/3 of their resources on sales and marketing and 1/3 on product and development.
Hmm.
And in Canada, we have this weird thing where we spend 2/3 of our resources on product and marketing and 1/3 on sales and marketing. And I think we're conservative by nature.
Hmm.
We are more hesitant to sell. I don't like the word vaporware, but we're more hesitant to sell ahead of where the product is. Um, and even as a founder and how you pitch your product, you're hesitant to pitch the vision versus they pitch where we are right now
Yeah.
versus
Right.
pitching the vision of what it's going to be. And that's also part of the storytelling. Like, how are you telling a story to get your investor or prospects excited about what you're doing? You can always dial it back in and be like, here's where I am, but this is what we're doing. Do you buy into the story?
Yeah. And I think, I know certainly I have this as an investor or as an entrepreneur. I have this idea of, I don't want to sell a dream, and I don't want to be a snake oil salesman. I want to stand
Right.
behind what I'm pitching and selling. And then you have the idea of like the Fire Festival story in your head,
Right.
where it's like these
Right.
guys sold like the best party ever that didn't exist at all, and they had no plan to make it exist, and it was just
Yeah.
a complete shit show. But I think probably you can overcorrect in the other direction, and as you say, I think Canadians are very, very are very conscious about not kind of overselling things, and sales is a bit more of a dirty word here. I noticed, than with my American clients, they're like, I'm a salesman. And in Canada, they're
Yeah.
like, I'm a sales, they're a lot more
Yeah.
embarrassed or sort of ashamed of being a salesperson. And so, yeah, it seems like that probably hurts a lot of founders when they don't want to overpromise, but they end up just making it sound completely like it
Yeah.
has nowhere to go, and they can't sell that story. Yeah.
Right.
How do you reconcile that, do you think?
Yeah. I mean, it's a balance of determining selling a vision and selling where you are right now. I mean, one of my best examples is, if you are meeting an investor for the first time, are they writing you a check today? Because then I would tell them where I am today, but they're not writing you a check today.
Yeah. Right.
At the earliest, they're writing you a check in 3 months from now,
Right.
maybe 6 months. So why am I not telling them a story of 6 months from now?
Mm,
They're not writing me the check today. So why am I telling them about today? I'll match it to my delivery date. We think we're going to close a transaction in 6 months. Cool. Let me tell you where we are in 6 months then. And that's the story I'm telling you. Same with sales. If I'm selling a prospect, hey, here's where we are today, but I'm trying to gather information around like, um, are these real pain points? Would you pay for a solution? Does this really solve a problem for you? Um, would you buy into this vision? Right? Like, those are the types of questions you're asking these people. You're not asking them to sign a contract today, or maybe you
yeah.
are, depending on where you are in your product cycle.
But
But
usually,
sometimes at
yeah.
earlier stages, you're just trying to gather intelligence. So don't try and hard sell the person. Be like, here's what we are, here's what we're doing, here's the pain point we're solving for. If I get it to this point, would you buy that? Yeah? Oh, that's wicked. Now go ask 20 more people that same question.
Mm.
And that's the kind of data points you're looking to collect at an early stage. And that's not,
That's
there's
kind of like
nothing,
customer development sort of phase, right?
yeah, and there's nothing disingenuous about that. You're being very honest about what you're doing and what your
Yeah.
intentions are.
Right.
But what you're doing is you're trying to create people who buy into your vision, who buy into the thesis of what you're solving. And those are your best customers. And those are the people who you want to keep as close as you can, because they're going to provide the most customer feedback for you to actually build a product that people want to use and buy.
Right. And so at Limelight, what was the vision that you sold people on? How did you describe it?
Yeah, and it was kind of funny. we were like kind of category creation. So we were, I mean, Limelight was an experimental marketing platform. So really about taking big brands and their live experiences that they had, and they'd get thousands of people to come out and try to track ROI around it,
Hmm.
productize it. We were automating a workflow that was traditionally like an agency would, cram something together and fire it out, and then after the event was done, they'd throw it away and the digital would be gone forever. We were
Hmm.
creating more of a reusable platform where you could reuse your digital and aggregate your data across all of these events to
Right.
try and do something. So our vision, I mean, really was, if you go high level, because it's all matters, your vision is different for your different buyer personas you're selling to.
Hmm.
So at the high level, it's like, don't you wish you knew ROI and attribution for all of your live spend, which is, if you're looking at an automotive company, their live spend could be $100 million a year.
Right.
Don't you wish you knew what your ROI on that $100 million was? And that's the big vision, but that's the CMO level.
Hmm.
If you bring it down a level to maybe a different manager, it's like, don't you wish you could sell to more of those leads you captured at that live experience? So really you're talking to
Right.
what their KPIs and what their needs were, and you had to tell a
Hmm.
different story at a different stage. Um, that's on the sales side, but that works exactly the same way on the investor side. Know your client. Who are you talking to? Are you talking to a partner? Are you talking to an associate? Are you talking to a fintech fund? Are you talking to Sequoia? Are you talking to a micro fund? Are they lead investors? Do they only do follow-ons? All of your conversations change because you have to tell a different story
Hmm.
to that different investor. Um, it's just it requires work. That's what the bottom line is, really.
Yeah. And again, I think a lot of that work is probably done by getting up there and pitching to different investors and learning that kind
Mm.
of on the fly. Would you suggest, I know, I mean, your company certainly, I'm sure is a great resource for this, but do you know those resources? Like if you're a founder listening to this, where do you go if you just feel like I don't know any the answers to any of these questions? Where would you send somebody to do some reading or to do some research to try to figure out what they need to know for these fundraising rounds?
Yeah, I mean, I think it all changes throughout. I know, I mean, Boast, if you some of our events, we do a traction webinar series. We've
Hmm.
got a ton of webinars from like Silicon Valley leaders and everywhere from like raising your seed round all the way to Series Bs and Series Ds. Like we've got some great content on there.
And that's
But
just
a lot
Boast.ai.
Boast.ai, go to
Cool.
events and you can sign up for our traction webinars. We do two webinars a week. We've got over 120,000 subscribers to the webinar series, and we're booked till September. It's crazy. We've got a crazy rock. We had Jeff Lawson from Twilio on about a month ago, so we get some amazing speakers that come on and speak for it. So a great place to find content there. And then within that ecosystem, there's a lot of people who have, you know, lists of angels, lists of different VCs that you can kind of tap into as you kind of get into the community.
Right.
Again, you got to do some due diligence on it. That's the number one. There's no shortcut. You got to do work. You
Yeah,
got to
yeah,
put in the
right.
research. Yeah.
Hmm. And I guess, yeah, the lists of VCs and the books that you read and stuff. Again, that's kind of all theoretical. Eventually, you're going to have to sort of do it yourself, and
Yeah.
yeah.
Even if you get the list, you still got to comb through it and say,
Hmm.
which one of these match what I'm doing?
Yeah.
Oh, these guys are only fintech investors. These guys are only blockchain investors. These guys are only AI investors. Like whatever it might be, you got to make sure that the mandate from the fund matches what you're doing.
Right. Um, yeah, that's there. There's so much that goes into it, and I think the work that you're doing is so necessary to help people through the fundraising journey because yeah, there's a million mistakes that you can make. And every founder I'm talking to who's in a fundraising thing right now is just, yeah, they're you can see there's just they're weighted
Yeah.
down by all the different things they have to think about. As usual, we're coming to the end of this thing, and I still have a
Yeah.
million questions for you. So yeah, I would love maybe at some point if we could do a part two because we sort of stuck to the pitch investor side of things today.
Yeah.
I'd love to get into some of the stuff you said you're hiring with Boast and there's that scaling process. I'm really interested in that as well. Maybe we can do a part two if that works for you and we can get into that other stuff.
Sure. Yeah. Sounds good.
Okay.
Absolutely. Would love to.
That would
Yeah.
be awesome. And so for now, yeah, just give me a bit of a sense of what Boast AI does and where founders can go and what they can get from it.
Yeah, absolutely. So Boast.ai, we are automating the tax credit process. So in Canada, it's the shred program. It's a very painful process that most founders have to go through to recover their tax credits.
Hmm.
We build software that automate that. We tie into your tech stack, into Jira, to Git, to pull out the data necessary to help you write a claim. So that's what we're doing. And in the US, there's a similar program. It's an R&D program, and we're automating that as well. So it's really been a space that has been neglected for 40 years. It's been around, but there's been no innovation on it. And
Because it's just all a bunch
we're
of
really,
specialists who are kind of taking the work for you, right?
it's been a consultant driven kind of accountant based
Right.
model.
Yeah.
And we are a hybrid. We're accountants, we're engineers, and we're software. And we're trying to automate as much as we can of it to bring it so it's cheaper, better, and faster for our clients.
And who are the people who need it most, would you say? Your target market.
Yeah, anybody doing R&D, which is typically early stage companies. So anybody who's building new software, breaking things quickly, like that's all refundable,
Right.
cash refundable for
Mm.
early stage companies. So we help you bring these cash flows forward, so you can spend them. And we actually have a product where you can take it out quarterly as opposed to waiting 12, 15 months for your refund. You get it quarterly
Mm.
and reinvest that back into your company to grow even faster.
Wow. That's awesome. And as you said too, you have lots of webinars and you have live talks, and sort of, are these resources for entrepreneurs, would you say, mostly?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Traction webinar series is all geared towards entrepreneurs, Silicon Valley type speakers who are coming in and giving hacks on pretty much everything, HR, marketing, sales, development, products, leadership, boards, anything you can think of. There's
Yeah.
categories. I think we're over 150 different sessions now.
Wow.
And just a great roster of content and information for people. And then, yeah, it's all available on the Boast.ai website. You can go check that out.
BOAST.ai.
That's it. Yeah.
Great. Yeah.
Yeah. And then go to our events page and you can sign up for it, and you'll get notifications of all the different webinars coming out.
Great. And you have a really cool thing as well, which is the SaaS playbook.
Yeah.
Where
On
can
my
people?
LinkedIn profile.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Yeah, so go to my LinkedIn profile, and I've got so I've done some Traction webinars before. I have the Entrepreneur's Guide to Fundraising, and it's pretty much my story of fundraising and how I kind of view about the storytelling behind it. And I have a SaaS sales playbook, which is like, how do you figure out what your go-to-market sales process and design should look like? And then I got some other content on there as well, how to create a pitch deck, and sales pipeline velocity, meaning like my deals are stuck. How do I move them quicker? So
Mm,
lots of content on there. It's all free,
amazing.
and that's just on my LinkedIn profile.
Russ Armstrong, and I'll link everything. We're gonna put it on YouTube, but as well we'll cut up clips of all this stuff, and so we're gonna try to have these links available as much as possible, so anybody watching this, if you're interested, can go see this. And because it's such amazing stuff, I've had a look at it, and I've seen you present at the Founders Institute on it, and it's really really amazing stuff. And I love that you're sort of practicing what you preach. Is you're putting your story out there, you're giving away great valuable content for free, and great stuff is happening to you. So that's really cool to see.
Yeah, it's awesome. No, it's good.
Yeah.
It's that's the half of it, is just pay it forward, and I think that's the greatest thing about the tech ecosystem. Everybody
Hmm.
does like to pay it forward. So
Yeah, that it's like one of the most supportive. I would not have thought that before I kind of wandered my
right.
way in here 4 years ago, but it really is. It's definitely more than the acting industry. I can tell you that.
Yeah, yeah. I think everybody recognizes how hard it is.
Hmm.
So helping each other out is just the best way you can do it. So
And it doesn't feel as much like a zero-sum game in the tech world. Maybe it is, and I'm not seeing it, but it feels more like that. There's collaboration and there's mutual support, rather than like, oh, there's a limited number of funds, so I got to knock off my competition to get them. It seems like,
exactly.
yeah, yeah,
Everybody has the nuances of what they're building, and there might be adjacent, but they're not the same thing. So
yeah. We can all kind of coexist and help each other
yep,
out, which is really nice. Well,
yep.
thank you so much, Russ. This was really, really awesome, an amazing conversation. And as I say, I would love to do a part two and talk about later on in the fundraising and growing process. But this has just been amazing. So many great lessons, I think, from your experience. So thanks so much for doing this.
Absolutely. Anytime. Thanks, Will.
Okay. Have a great day.
Thanks. Bye-bye.